Okay, welcome aboard. Today we're cooking brisket. So a packer cut of brisket is actually comprised of two parts. We have what's known as the flat of the brisket, and we also have something called a point. Two distinct, unique flavor profiles, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first and foremost, what we'll do is we'll take the brisket apart. We're going to clean it and get it ready for trimming. What we did is we washed the brisket thoroughly, and then just to get all the blood and kind of juices off of it, we patted it dry, and now we are going to be ready to trim. So let's review. A packer cut is a combination of two different types of muscles. Basically, they are intersecting at a certain point. There are two briskets to each cow. So basically, there's about 60 to 65% of a cow's weight that is on the front of the animal. The cow does not have a collarbone, so basically all of the weight and all of the movement that causes this particular cut of meat to be very, very tough and stringy and kind of pretty tough to break down the fibers of the meat. What we need to do is apply a technique that is known as a very low and slow type of a cooking technique in order to break down the brisket fibers and turn the collagen, which is part of the meat, into sugars. And that happens when you actually use a smoker, and within the smoker at a low and slow temperature over a period of many, many hours, the meat turns very, very tender. So that's what we're looking for. So first and foremost, we need to trim this thing. There's a couple of parts to this, and if you notice the back actually has a fat cap on it, and this cap, we do not want this cap to be any greater than about 1/4 of an inch. So in this case, we're going to start by taking a look where the fattest part of the cap is, and to start to trim off this fat and discard it. This type of fat is not good fat. What it is stuff that will never render down. You'll never be able to get enough heat. If you do, the brisket is going to taste like shoe leather. So basically what we're looking for is about 1/4 of an inch of fat protection as the meat is cooking. There is a big chunk of fat that is right on the outside here. We're going to get rid of that. Little straggles. Go. And we don't want to go then too far. We still want enough fat to be able to add flavor as the meat is cooking, but at the same time we don't want so much of it that the heat cannot penetrate and we can't get our seasoning to penetrate, so we want to take off as much of the quote-unquote big stuff as we can. That looks pretty good up on top. We also can see over here there's a big fat cap right here. We're going to take this down a little bit further. As such, you don't have to be a Rembrandt about it. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So, and there's one more big pocket of fat, and you can see it right over here. If you actually put your fingers in, you can actually separate out the part of the point. So we're going to get rid of a lot of this because there's no way that this particular amount of fat will ever get rendered down to where it tastes good. So we don't want that at all. So we'll just sort of cut into this pocket. And we're going to trim off as much of this as we can. And you can see this is just loose fat. There's really no value to this. A little bit more in here. So what we're dealing with here is a little bit of the silver membrane. We're going to take off as much of this as possible. If we were in competition, we certainly don't want that because it could affect the finished flavor of the meat. You don't want a judge to bite into a little piece of silver gristle or whatever. That could reduce your score significantly. But in the case of home cooking, this looks actually very, very good. It looks very clean. I don't think that'll be an issue at all. A couple more little pieces of fat back here. And here is a finished, prepared brisket. The next step is going to be seasoning prior to putting it into the smoker or onto the grill, whatever your preference is going to be. In this case, we have a steam pan. It's just going to make it a little bit easier for us to actually apply the different types of seasoning to it and be able to flip it, etc. So a little bit about seasoning. You know, different people have different likes, different tastes. Judges have different tastes. I guess seasoning is kind of up to you what you want to put into it. I learned early in my life that too much of a good thing is as bad as not enough. When I discovered at the age of 18 hot peppers, oh my God, it was peppers on everything. And it got to the point where it was so overwhelming that one day my uncle, who was a very, very connoisseur type of a guy, specifically with Chinese cooking, he said to me, you know, the concept of flavor is to enhance, using spices to enhance whatever it is that you're doing. So in this case, if it's meat, you want the flavor of the meat to come out. You don't want to overburden the meat with the flavor of the spices. So there are very simple spices, salt, pepper, a little bit of garlic salt, and very, very complex spices, which could include ground coffee and cumin and all sorts of manner of different kinds of spices. Again, I suppose it's up to you, and you're going to have to experiment with flavors and with finished textures. I use a coarse ground pepper. I use some barbecue seasoning, which is kind of a combination of some hotter types of peppers. Maybe even just a little dab of paprika, some sriracha pepper, and large chunks of sea salt. I think that salt is something that enhances the flavor. Not too much of it, because if you use too much salt, it's going to have a tendency to dry out the meat, because salt actually dehydrates meat. It's the other way of thinking. I think a lot of people think that salt is something that retains moisture. It's actually the opposite. It takes moisture out. We're using garlic powder, bigger chunks of it, minced garlic. We're using pepper. We're using a little bit of that barbecue mix. And what we want to do is we want to basically cover, but not too heavily. We're going to cover the brisket. So in this case, we're going to just go in lightly and dab this stuff on. If you have a shaker, that's fine. You can do whatever pretty much you want. What you have to be careful of is watch out for pockets. For example, you'll see that this particular brisket has this pocket, which we cut out the fat. That pocket, you don't want to get too much spices into that pocket, because as it cooks, it'll have a tendency to close up, and you're going to get this spot of a lot of extreme flavor of the spices rather than the meat itself. So try to be as even as you possibly can when applying spices. Same within this pocket where we took out this big, huge chunk of fat over here. It's good to put in some, but again, too much is as bad as not enough. The reason it's called rub, well, you give it a good old rub. Everybody likes a good massage, including a good cut of brisket. So I think we have enough on the front end. We're going to flip this, and this is actually going to be the position in which we will be putting it into the smoker. We want to have the fat on top, because as the heat is coming around, it's going to be melting. It's going to be rendering this fat cap, and it's going to work its way down through. The juices are going to certainly become enhanced by virtue of the fat. We all know that everything with bacon tastes good. Bacon is nothing more than fat. So in this case, fat is a good thing, but not, again, too much of it. So we're going to apply the seasoning to the back side of this. A nice even coating. and rub it in. Okay, so this stage of the presentation is done. Next step is getting it into the smoker. We'll talk about the smoker as soon as we come back. Okay, so we're ready for the next step in the cooking process. This particular model is technically called a horizontal offset reverse flow smoker. The reason that it's a horizontal smoker is because the air inside is going to be rotating in a horizontal manner. Reverse flow meaning that the back end of the smoker actually contains the firebox, so that's where heat is going to be coming through. It will go underneath a plate and come back out. And as you can see, the chimney is in the rear portion of the smoker. That is what the reverse flow is all about. We're looking for a temperature of around 225 degrees, and the finished temperature of the brisket will be about 198 degrees. So however long it takes to get to that point, you're going to have a perfect cut of meat. So in this case, we're going to be putting the meat onto the top tray. Again, fat cap up. The point is going to be closer to the source of the heat. It's going to get a little bit more heat on this end rather than this end, so that way we will get an even cooking temperature. And we'll close it up, give it around 10 to 12 hours, and we'll see what happens. We're done with our cooking, so let's take a look at the finished product. As we stated before, the brisket is comprised of two parts. We have the point, which is a thicker section, and we have the flat, which is the lateral section. There are two actually intersecting muscles that comprise this. So when it comes to cutting, it's a little bit tricky. We don't want to start cutting and keep cutting the same way all the way through. Because these muscles actually intersect, we have the pectoral muscles and the superficial muscles, which are part of the front of the cow. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to slice down against the grain, and then we'll turn the brisket 90 degrees, and then we will slice it again against the grain once we hit the 90-degree point of the muscle. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's see how we did. Couple of things that we're looking for. Number one is a smoke ring. When I cut this brisket in half, and you'll be able to see where that intersecting point actually is. You can see that the two muscles intersect around this point. That looks really good. And so once it comes time to slice the point of the brisket, what we'll do is we'll cut again against the grain, not with the grain, as these two muscles actually intersect at this point. So in this case, we want to actually go this way. And that is a perfect piece of brisket. Thanks for watching.